I didn't think that drinking and the drugs was a problem. The problem was that I was feeling miserable, had really high levels of anxiety, and then things started to escalate into these extreme panic attacks. Now, still, even when that was all happening, so I had lots of drinking, lots of drugs, lots of anxiety, lots of depression, I still didn't think or realize that there was a problem. I was just like in this dark mire, this mess, and you don't even know that you're in a mess. You're just kind of trying to get by each day, and you're doing the fun stuff, and then you're trying to cope with the side effects of the fun stuff, which was these waves of panic attacks and depression. And but you don't know that you've got depression. You don't know that you've got panic attacks. You're just battling through what life is at that time.
Hi, Tom. Welcome to the Inside Addiction podcast.
Hey man, it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to this session today.
Awesome, awesome. So, I wonder if you could just start off by telling us a bit about your own journey of addiction and your own kind of story growing up and how that played out in your life.
Yeah, it's interesting how we can default into these sort of situations without even realizing that it's happening sometimes, for some people anyway. And for me, I grew up on a farm, had a very healthy upbringing. I was brought up in an Irish Catholic sort of background environment, and it was a very close family and a great family, big family of seven. And I had a finished school, and I was about to do a degree in journalism at university, but I decided to take a year off and travel the world. And I came back from traveling around the world and had a few months to fill in before university started. So I just applied to a bunch of jobs in the paper. And before long, I was on a trading room floor, like Wolf of Wall Street. The same year Wolf of Wall Street started his career. And it was 1987. And it was kind of crazy times back then in the markets. This was before we had HR departments and people and culture and all those sort of regulatory sort of organizations within the companies to sort of keep things in check. So it was kind of crazy times. And it was fun. It was fast. It was furious. It was very exciting. Before long, I was on a six-figure salary, had a sports car and a corporate Amex card, and told to go out and win clients' business. So for me, that was just like, I was 19 years old, and I was just lit up by this idea of having lots of parties and entertaining lots of big traders. And big part of that industry back then was a lot of drinking and a lot of drugs. And, it was kind of pretty standard that every environment, every situation, every social event had a lot of drinking. It was all pretty much provided by the companies. And then, of course, what went with a lot of drinking was obviously behind the scenes was a fair bit of drug consumption. And that was just kind of social stuff. It was just part of the fun activities that you did. We were young, we had a lot of money, and, you're just defaulting into that collective environment and becoming part of that ebb and flow of that mass movement of the environment that I was in. And before long, I was doing a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs. And it wasn't like I had a bad life or anything was difficult or challenging. It was just lots of fun. I was just having lots of fun and enjoying that. And that kind of started to lead me down a path that, because the irony is that you're seeking fun through those activities, but then they start removing the fun and enjoyment out of life, because that's the only place you end up being able to find it. And that leads to you craving more and more and more. And that leads you down this vicious cycle of, almost dependency.
Yeah. And for you, Tom, when did you start to recognize things were transitioning from kind of fun? I'm living this lifestyle. I'm 19. I'm having fun. I'm entertaining clients. It's for work. All of those kind of justifications to starting to realize things were getting a bit worse than what you were telling yourself.
It's interesting because you don't really think that the things you're doing are the problem. For me anyway, this is my experience, and some people listening might resonate. I didn't think that drinking and the drugs was a problem. The problem was that I was feeling miserable, had really high levels of anxiety, and then things started to escalate into these extreme panic attacks. Now, still, even when that was all happening, so I had lots of drinking, lots of drugs, lots of anxiety, lots of depression, I still didn't think or realize that there was a problem. I was just like in this dark mire, this mess, and you don't even know that you're in a mess. You're just kind of trying to get by each day, and you're doing the fun stuff, and then you're trying to cope with the side effects of the fun stuff, which was these waves of panic attacks and depression. And but you don't know that you've got depression. You don't know that you've got panic attacks. You're just battling through what life is at that time. It wasn't until it really blew up one day in February 1996, after 10 years of this particular lifestyle, and this sort of slide deeper and deeper into more addiction and more misery, that it blew up one morning in a full-blown nervous breakdown. And that's when my partner picked me up off the bathroom floor. She took me to the doctor, and that's when the doctor said, I thought I was having a heart attack, just so you know. I was caught up in a ball. My vision had blurred. I couldn't breathe. I had a sharp pain in my heart. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to go to the toilet. My whole body was just sort of self-imploding at that point. And like I said, I thought I was having a heart attack. She took me to the doctors, and he said, you're actually having a nervous breakdown. And I just burst into tears. I just couldn't stop crying. I was like, my whole world at that point, as soon as he said that, my whole world just crumbled around me. And then he sent me to a psychiatrist, and then things just kind of went into this whole new transition of like, I'm a basket case, I'm a mess. And this was like, now the light was shining on that. And I didn't realize until that point what things were like and how bad it is. And I was a very functioning person. My partner didn't even know that I was having these problems. My family didn't know. My colleagues didn't know. You know, I was very good at masking, which a lot of people, high functioning addicts, can do. You know, I'd turn up on that trading room floor every single day. You know, I'd be in a cubicle in the toilet having an anxiety attack, and that would pass, and then I'd come out and pick up the phone and start trading millions and billions of dollars worth of swaps and bonds. So, you know, this is part of the problem, is that we just don't know that there's a problem.
Yeah, and like you say, very high functioning, and that becomes a justification in itself, right? I've still got a job, you know, I'm not on a park bench, so I must be fine. I can keep going, until you can't. And I mean, for you, Tom, you know, you did reach that point where you had a nervous breakdown. For someone that's like a few steps before that, and for the version of you that was a few steps before that, what advice would you give to that person to kind of recognize things aren't quite adding up?
Yeah, well, it's so hard when we're in that state, because you're just so dependent on the things that are trying to help you to feel good, which is the drugs and the drinking. But having that, there was one moment before that nervous breakdown where I remember being on holidays in my favorite place in the world, a place called Byron Bay. And I was having a holiday with my partner, my wife now, and I was curled up in a ball. I remember she was in the lounge room reading a book, and I was in the bedroom. She didn't know what was going on. I was just told her I was having a rest. But I was curled up in a ball, and I remember having the most horrendous anxiety panic attack. It was just like this wave and wave of panic coming through my body. And here I was in the most beautiful location in the world, having a holiday. I was on multiple six-figure salary, and I remember going through I was pressing each finger, listing all the things that were so awesome in my life. I had an amazing partner. I had the most amazing level of affluence, a beautiful house in Bondi. I had amazing family. My parents were beautiful, still together, married, beautiful, close family. I was, you know, physically blessed with good health and everything, other than this mental health, which I didn't realize. And so everything was on the surface. You couldn't have got a better life. Like you know, I had one of the best lives in the world, and I realized that, but that didn't change anything. And I think the big thing is, for anyone that might be at that point or prior to that point, and this is something that I learned a long time later, that unhappiness is proportional to our resistance to change, and happiness is proportional to our ability to embrace change. And what I was doing, I was maintaining a status quo that was not evolutionary, wasn't supportive, and I was maintaining doing the same thing over and over again, the same thing over and over again, the same thing over and over again. And if we don't tune into that disease, discomfort, discord, these things that aren't joy, aren't health, aren't happiness, then that's the universe's way of saying, hey, this is not the right path. You have to make some changes here. And, you know, we're so stubborn and so resistant to change. And this is part of our downfall as a species. We're seeing this collectively on the planet right now. We're so resistant to adaptability. You know, we'll have a photo of gangrene on the front of a packet of cigarettes. I don't know if you have that in England, but in Australia we have that says, you will lose your leg if you smoke these cigarettes, you'll lose your teeth, you know, all these horrendous things to try and stop. And people will still open the packet and smoke a packet of cigarettes. You know, like and for me, I didn't have that capacity to tune in and adapt. And this is maybe part of my nature. I was so stubborn being a Scorpio. I had to wait till breaking point. And this is what we call in engineering terms, I think it's engineering terms, a bifurcation point, where we either break down or break through. And a business will either break down or break through, a relationship will break down or break through, a human will break down or break through, a civilization can break down or break through. And that's that fork in the road we get to where we can't actually keep going straight. We can't keep doing the same thing. It's that final point in our destination that says, this is it. You've got to pivot here. You can either go this way, it's all over, Red Rover, or you go this way and things get remarkably better.
Yeah. And for you, you said you went to the doctor and to a psychiatrist. And how did that go for you? Would you say you broke down or broke through, or was it a process of both of them?
Yeah, it's interesting. And this is not to disregard that as an option for people. I don't want to talk anyone out of whatever path or tools that they're using. I went to the doctor and then I went to the psychiatrist. He put me on medication. And I remember what had happened was I developed agoraphobia. That is a result of extreme anxiety and panic attacks, where my nervous system was so overwhelmed with the proposition of just walking out the front door of the house, buying a bus ticket, getting on a bus, going to work. I couldn't face any of those challenges. It was just too big a deal. And so you develop agoraphobia, which means that you stay in the tightest, smallest, safe place, which was just staying at home. And so this was 1996, and I developed agoraphobia after seeing the doctor and the psychiatrist. You know, I could get there and get home, and that was it. And I was put on medication, and I could just feel over this length of time, I wasn't going to work. I was taking mental health leave. But I could feel I was just checking out. I could feel that I wasn't the full version of myself. I knew that there was just something not right in this process. There was something deep in me at a spiritual level, I believe, that was calling me to say, I don't think this is the path for you. And interestingly, around that time, what happened was I was at home watching free-to-air TV because it's 1996. There's no internet. It's kind of sucked back then, but it was good for us as well. It was really simple back then. And I was watching TV, and there was a documentary about a property developer, a really big, successful property developer. And, you know, I really was fascinated by this guy because of his success, and I was into success and big money and all that sort of stuff still. And it was a 1-hour documentary, but for like 3 minutes in that documentary, he talked about how he used a particular style of meditation, transcendental meditation. I remember he said this word, transcendental meditation. I never heard of it, but this word transcending got me so excited because I kind of loved transcending with drugs, which is getting out of it, from going one place to another place. My whole life was like the rave culture, the nightclubs, coke and ecstasy. So when he said transcendental meditation, and they showed him in a suit in a room with his eyes closed, sitting in a chair meditating. So there was no shaved head, there's no Buddhist robes, there was no, you know, religion associated with it even. He was just a dude in a suit that was a very successful businessman. And he talked about how he used this because it was really a powerful tool for his success. And I tell you, it was like a light bulb moment for me at that point. It was like what he looked like sitting in that chair with his eyes closed. And just the peace that was coming across his face. And I knew that that's something I'd never experienced before. And interesting, what I did was I went to the Yellow Pages phone book, and that's, for the young kids listening, that's Google back then. And I started looking up M for meditation in the Yellow Pages. And I remember coming across, and you could highlight your business by putting it in red. All the other print in the Yellow Pages was black. And if you wanted to pay extra money, you could bring yours up in red. And I remember transcendental meditation was in bright red. And I'm like, there it is again, transcendental meditation. And so I rang up, not just them, I went to a lot of different meditation centers and tried lots of different meditations, but this one blew me away. It was a game changer. It really changed my life very quickly. So what happened was I learned the meditation, and things changed very quickly in my body. And what happened was I went out of the sympathetic nervous system, the stress response, to the parasympathetic, the peace response. And as a result of that, all my biochemistry changed. And so, yeah, I recovered very quickly, and I went back to work in that same job, in the same industry, with the same clients for 16 more years, just being a meditating, non-drinking, non-drug taking broker. And, you know, it really helped me get not just back on track, but elevate to a whole other level. And that was a game changer for me.
Yeah. And just to give the audience a bit of a definition, what is transcendental meditation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's so many different ways to meditate. We can have guided meditations where you're listening to someone talking, like Matthew McConaughey reading your bedtime story in the Calm app, or you can go through your chakras, your energy points, and make sure they're all aligned, or you can visualize things happening in your life. You can do gratitude, or you can focus on the breath and try and still the mind to just the one point, which is the breath moving in and out of your body. But with transcendental meditation or Vedic meditation, it's the same thing, different sort of words for the same sort of technique. What happens with Vedic meditation, transcendental meditation, is you use this sound. It's an ancient primordial, it's actually a universal primordial vibration. And you repeat this sound inside your head very effortlessly. And that sound does all the work for you. You don't have to try to meditate. You don't have to concentrate. You just simply repeat the sound. And what happens is that repetition of that frequency, that vibration, it's just like it's almost like a word, but it's not a word. And you repeat that over and over again. And what happens is it quietens the mind. It's like soothing a baby's back really gently while it's in a cot trying to sleep. And the repetition of that sound takes the mind beyond thinking. So that's where transcendence is so important. Two things happen when we transcend, which means we're awake, but we're now no longer having a thought. It's a very rare experience for most humans that haven't done this meditation, to experience themselves as awareness, but not having a thought. And it's this incessant thinking in the mind, the backwards and forwards, all the thinking, and predominantly most of that thinking being panic thinking, that's worrying thinking or regret thinking, creates a very negative response in the body biochemically. This is part of the problem. When we're in that state with a very frenetic, busy mind, we then have a very frenetic, busy body, and that causes extreme distortion and stress response. But when the mind gets into stillness, because it's found the sweet nectar of pure, we call it pure consciousness, where the mind is awake and not thinking, it's found bliss. It's very blissful and very pleasantly charmed by that deep quietness. And so now the mind is still because it's fulfilled, it's satiated, and it doesn't find thinking as charming as the charm that it's found in this deep state of meditation. And at that point, two great benefits come. Our body goes into a profoundly deep state of rest. And that's where it starts to heal and reorganize itself. And that's what happened for me. It healed itself very quickly. Now, I didn't have to do anything. A doctor didn't have to do anything. A psychiatrist didn't have to do anything. Medication didn't even have to do anything. My body did what it does really well. And it's designed, every single body's designed for that if we give it the appropriate environment. And so my body started to heal itself. So that's the first thing that happens. And the second thing is we liberate our mind from the thoughts. Most of us think we're the thinking mind, the thoughts, but we're not. They're just things like clouds in the sky. The clouds aren't the sky. They're things that occupy the sky. So our mind, we have the field of mind or conscious mind, or pure conscious mind. And then we have the thinking mind, which is the thoughts in the mind. So we've got to start to separate the two and realize that, yes, I can have thoughts, but I'm also awareness itself. And that's where things get really powerful and significant.
Yeah. So I have thoughts, but I'm also awareness itself. I also have that state of awareness that's there. And a common thing that people say to me all the time is, Luke, when I try and sit down to meditate, my mind is going a million miles an hour. I can't sit still. I can't focus. It's too much. It's overwhelming. What do you say to those kind of people? How do they get started when they feel like there's just such a barrier there, which is their own mind?
Yeah. Well, look, I have to say, having been through that myself many times with other techniques, the mind doesn't want to be still. And it shouldn't have to be still. It's not the nature of the mind to not think. It's not the nature of the mind to not analyze. It's not the nature of the mind to not forecast or regress into the past. It is the nature of the mind to look for charm, though. And that's why it likes thinking. And the mind actually enjoys negative thoughts more than it likes positive thoughts, surprisingly, because it gets more traction, more charge out of negative thoughts. And so if we let the mind just run rampant, then it will run rampant like a wild bucking bronco that's never been tamed. But here's the catch. If we try to force the mind to not do what it wants to do, then it becomes uncomfortable. And like your clients would say, it's stressful. It's ironic that we can have stressful meditations because we're trying to get the mind to do something it doesn't want to do, and that causes conflict. There's you forcing the mind to do something it doesn't want to do. Try doing that with a teenager. There's conflict. And so we want to inspire and lure and charm the mind into quietness. And that's, I've got to say, where the mantra comes in, and coming into a training program with a teacher that will actually give you that particular vibrational sound. So finding a teacher, going through a proper program and learning how to do that technique, I found was the game changer for me and all of my clients, to the point where I gave up my career to teach this. And now I'm teaching teachers how to teach this, because I can see this is one of the most powerful things we need on the planet.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And you mentioned charming your mind and the charm of your mind. What do you mean by the word charm?
Yeah, it's the nature of all of us to look for pleasure. You know, everything that we're doing in life is pleasure seeking. Even if we are cleaning the bathroom floor, it's because we will go through the hardship of cleaning the bathroom floor, because the end result is we get greater pleasure because the bathroom looks better when the floor is clean. We will go to the tin cannery and put, bottle tops on bottles, because even though we might not find pleasure in that experience, but we'll find pleasure in the fact that we have food on our table at the end of the day. And so we'll go through sometimes hoops and hurdles to get ultimately to pleasure again. And we're always looking for pleasure. It's why we have Spotify. It's why we have Netflix. It's why we have Instagram. It's why we have Tim Tams and Milo and all the things that we have in our world. It's why we have pubs in every corner, because we're constantly craving pleasure. And that's the nature of the mind. And so what we want to do is look at, okay, well, pleasure seeking doesn't necessarily work out well for us if it's unchecked and unregulated. And my mind is constantly seeking pleasure, and quite often it seeks pleasure even in negative territory, which doesn't serve me well either. So it's like this out of control thing that gets to do whatever it wants, even though it doesn't make my life better. And so what we want to do is we want to introduce something that's quite pleasurable for the mind that will benefit us in the long run. And that is where the mantra repetition and the sound, the quality of that sound is very blissful and very peaceful for the mind. And the mind's like, you know what? This is not uncomfortable. I don't mind the repetition of this sound. In fact, I could sit here for long periods of time with this person repeating that sound, and I wouldn't be bored. I'm actually quite delighted in this. It's very blissful and pleasurable. And then what happens is that mantra takes the mind deeper and deeper and quieter and quieter. Then it gets closer and closer to ultimately the supreme source of pleasure. We call this pure consciousness or blissful awareness or bliss consciousness. And because when the mind finds this inner silence and stillness, it has a quality to it which is very blissful. It's a heightened bliss. And at that point, we feel this beautiful euphoria and beautiful blissfulness in that deep quietness. And so the mind will spontaneously let go of thinking, because it's just replaced the thinking pleasure with something greater, which is the bliss conscious pleasure. And this comes back to addiction, which we can talk about, because this is what actually helps people by default let go of their addictions. Because all addictions are seeking pleasure.
Yeah, and one thing you said is about transcending with drink and drugs. Sometimes we transcend in that way, or transcending with meditation or transcendental meditation. What's the difference there? What's the difference in your mind?
Yeah, I love working with addicts. They're such great people to work with, because they have this in-depth knowing that there is something greater in life. There is something that they're seeking and craving and looking for. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is the whole point of being a human, is to find the absolute truth, the wonder and the beauty of what it is to be true and what it is to be in being. It's just that most of us, myself included, we look for that initially in places that we can't find it. But the craving and the longing is still there. And it can be in a religion, it can be in alcohol, can be in gambling, can be in drugs, can be in sex. It's still looking for that higher experience. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with looking for that higher experience, because that's an experience of what it is to be the ultimate human experience, is to have that connection to the higher self, to our true nature, the I beyond the thinking mind, beyond the feeling body, and beyond the physical body. And so when we have addictions, it's like, okay, that's cool. You've got this insatiable appetite to connect with something bigger and higher. It's just that you're looking for it down the bottom of a bottle, or you're looking for it in a pokie machine, you're looking for it in a sexual experience. And let's just redirect your attention. Keep that energy, keep that yearning, but let's go down a path where we'll take you beyond the current way that you're trying to find things.
Yeah, and for you, Tom, why do you think you were looking in the wrong place when you were a trader in that environment? Why do you think you were looking in the wrong place yourself?
The analogy I like to use is this: is if you take a cow, a group of cows, and so you've got all these cows in a paddock, and they know they'll eat grass all day long because they inherently know the grass is good for them. There's no problem about that. So you've got this lush green grass, cows eating the grass, all good. Now, if I take a table, put in the middle of the paddock, and a massive sugar block, I put that massive sugar block on the table, and I leave it there on the table. Now the cows will lick that sugar block all day long, and they'll start getting ulcers and stomach aches, and all sorts of things will start going wrong with them. And that's because the sugar block has superseded their immediate and direct path to pleasure. It's the quickest route. It might not be the best route, but it's the quickest route to more pleasure. And this is what happens with our life in the Western world. We've made it very easy to access pleasure very quickly, but it comes at a huge price, at a huge expense. And we're like a normal animal. All animals will take the shortest route to pleasure. Without enough mindfulness and without conscious awareness, we will do that regardless of the consequences. And most of us on the planet know very clearly that buckets of ice cream, bowls of KFC, and huge bottles of Coca-Cola, we all know that they're not good for us, but we'll still load up our shopping trolleys with those things in them, because it's just an easy source of pleasure. And in the industry that I was in, with loads of money and everyone else doing it, and not to blame the industry, I was part of that facilitation and the creation of that. It was just extreme narcissistic, hedonistic pleasure seeking, and that's what we're unfortunately, we've defaulted into being in that trap on the planet as a whole.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Tom. And one thing, I love the analogy with the cows and the sugar. One thing I find challenging though sometimes is when the sugar is there, it's really hard to eat the grass sometimes. And especially when everyone else is
Absolutely.
eating the sugar, when everyone else is enjoying the sugar and you have to go and eat the grass, sometimes that's really fucking hard. And
It
for
is hard,
you, yeah,
absolutely.
and for you, Tom, you had both of those, right? You were in, Wall Street, and you had all of those years of having the sugar. Then you transition to the years of being at peace and being fulfilled and content with the grass. What was it like for you in the second half of the equation when you were still in that environment? No one else changed on Wall Street, right? They're still doing coke and being bonkers and doing what they're doing. That's fine. How was it for you to manage that, being around all of that sugar, so to speak, and being the cow that's eating the grass?
Yeah, you ask really good questions. When I was down here, let's call it Shitsville, having the sugar, and everyone knows what the analogy is now, elevated me out of Shitsville. Now, of course, at the end of having the sugar, I was back in Shitsville, which meant I had to go back to the sugar again. But what happened with the meditation was, because you get out of the sympathetic nervous system and you move into the parasympathetic nervous system, what happens is your cortisol, norepinephrine, and adrenaline levels drop really down low. You no longer live on adrenaline and cortisol. And what happens is your biochemicals of serotonin and oxytocin, the bliss chemicals, increase. It's been scientifically proven, and you can do some research on that, where the increase of serotonin and oxytocin as a result of meditation, which are the bliss chemicals, the chemicals that make you feel happiness and love. Now, I was addicted to MDMA. I loved ecstasy. And the reason why I loved that was because it produced high levels of oxytocin and serotonin into my blood. The MDMA doesn't give you the serotonin and oxytocin. It's not in the tablet. The tablet triggers the body to release large amounts of it from your brain into the bloodstream. And now you're flooded with this huge gush of serotonin, oxytocin, which is why we get the ecstasy, because the body's capacity to create those biochemicals is always there. And then MDMA just triggers a large dump of it. Now, interestingly, what happens is when your body dumps all that serotonin and oxytocin into your bloodstream after a massive rave or nightclub or something, you've got very limited supplies left. So you can be days and days and days after that big bender on the weekend, and you just can't feel happy because you've got nothing left in the tank and your stores are empty. Now, what happened with meditation is that my cortisol levels dropped, my adrenaline levels dropped, and my serotonin and oxytocin levels increased. And I started feeling blissful for no apparent reason. And I even had a student that I taught who was another trader. He came and learned with me eventually. And he said, I don't know what it is, man, but like, I feel like I've taken an Equitab. That's what he said to me after 3 weeks of meditating. And I said, dude, you've kind of effectively done the same thing, but in a better way that doesn't have that negative response, because we're just trickling very sustainable levels into your bloodstream through the meditation on a daily basis. Now, getting back to your question, when I was down in Shitsville, that sugar fix took me up and then took me back down again. But when I was in Blissville, the idea of coming down here to have the sugar, it just didn't quantify, it didn't measure. It was not like on my radar at all. I'd look at that and go, that doesn't appeal to me at all. And so that's why I like working with addicts, is like, let's replace the source of your, hit with something that's much more sustainable, that keeps you in a more elevated, healthy, happier state. And then the other stuff won't register. It's not like I have to force myself to not go to those things. I just didn't feel any charm anymore because the charm had been superseded by something more charming.
Yeah, yeah. And how do we manage the time and the impatience, right? If I'm on a Friday night and I can go and do loads of coke or loads of ecstasy, or I can do one meditation, my first meditation. Now that first meditation is not going to get me to that bliss level, but that line of coke or that ecstasy tablet or the MDMA, that will get me back to where I was. It's not the good idea. And I know intellectually that I should be heading towards the meditation. But how do I outlast that time? How do I make the switch, and how long does it take?
Well, look, definitely twice a day meditation was a game changer for me, and things turned around very, very quickly. Now, the one thing that we've got is a beautiful, beautiful, intelligent design in the universe. I'm going to use the universe as a word. Is that we have the law of cause and effect, and let's just call the trendy word what it is: karma. And what karma does is that if something is unsustainable and not in tune with natural law and not for our highest good, then karma will ensue a very negative and very uncomfortable experience as a result of that. And that's the intelligent guidance system that's trying to say, no, go another way. And what I started finding was that the karma that was coming from those experiences of going on a bender and doing the lines of coke the next day was just the downward spiral for the short-term hit. It just didn't measure anymore, and it just didn't add up. Whereas if I went home, meditated, went to the movies with some friends or my partner, woke up early, went to yoga, went for a surf down the beach, went to the gym, and felt freaking amazing all weekend, versus having a bender for 6 hours on a Friday night or 9 hours on a Friday night and then feeling crap all weekend. It was just so simple maths for me, really. It just became simple maths, only because I'd found alternatives though. And this is the thing, what I say to addicts is, don't give up. If you've got something that you're addicted to, don't try and give up, because you'll just feel defeated, you'll feel deflated, and you'll keep saying you've let yourself down and you let your friends down. But let's look at replacing that with things, and not just things and activities, but also community. That's the hardest thing for me. And what I found was, it's really interesting, and this is to give some people some hope, because the hardest thing is actually that sense of community that you're losing, that mateship and that bond. So one thing that's important, when everyone's down in Shitsville hanging out, there's a community there and there's camaraderie there. But if you want to move up to Blissville, don't worry, you're not going to be alone, because there's a whole ton of people in Blissville as well. And they're all hanging out doing cool shit as well. And so it's a matter of just, yes, you will lose some friendships, and hopefully some friends will come with you on the journey. There's no question about it though. There will be some friendships that will just no longer be relevant, and we have to learn how to surrender that with love and tenderness and kindness, not get attached. But know and have faith and trust that new friendships will forge that will be much more supportive, much more evolutionary. And what I started to do, and this is the thing for everyone, one thing that I really missed that Friday night after work drinks. I really missed that. That was the big one for me. The Friday night, the camaraderie, the backslapper, and you know. And so what I did was there was a really cool little kombucha bar in Bondi. It's a sort of kind of cool beachside suburb if no one's been there in Sydney, and a lot of yoga and meditation, and it's quite a little bit more alternative and healthier sort of lifestyle. But there's a really cool sort of kombucha bar there called Orchard Street. And I used to organize these big Friday night parties, and there would be cacao, there'd be kombucha, we'd have music playing, we'd get everyone to dress up in white, and it was, people loved it. People would just be flooded out onto the streets, and it was just this Friday night from 5 till sort of 8:30, and then everyone would say, you know, let's go out for dinner and go and have a healthy dinner, and we'd have such a great night of camaraderie, and everyone was really conscious because we're having really healthy drinks, and you know, it's wake up in the morning feeling fantastic. So
Yeah,
create your own community if you can't find one. That's the other thing.
yeah, and that's very courageous, right? That's very courageous to be like, look, I'm not doing these drinking drugs. I'm not going to fit in with these people. And like you said, a percentage of people are still going to do that. That's their journey. That's where they're at. That's completely fine. But you transition to a more sober experience and sober activities, and like I say, it hosted your own parties in a kombucha bar and had like a healthy, sober experience for people. How did you get the courage to do that? To be like, I'm just going to go my own path and hope people transition with me? Because a lot of clients I speak to, they're like, oh, if I stop drinking and using drugs, I'm going to lose all my friends. I'm going to lose my career. I'm going to lose everything. Like, how can I entertain clients? Like, how did you have the courage to make that transition?
Yeah, again, a really, really good question. And these are really important things because these are really, excuse me, really tangible issues that can come up. I've got a bit of a vocal cord. I've
No,
been
go
doing a
ahead.
lot of
That's
talking
fine.
over the last couple of days, so my vocal cord's a little bit stretched. So these are really tangible issues that come up in these transitions. And firstly, I want to say that all transitions in life are uncomfortable. So if you're going from one house to another house, living in this house can be fine, living in that house can be fine. Moving and transitioning from that one to that one is really uncomfortable. Going from one relationship to this relationship, these two can be fine, but transitioning can be really messy. So firstly, all transitions in life are a little bit awkward and uncomfortable. Secondly, you know, for me, that transition was, how do I take things to a higher level? So let's just look at a few situations. So mateship, right? So my mates, the only way we used to hang out was meeting at 9, 10 o'clock at night sometimes and starting the night out, right? And that's when we would really start to go on big benders. See at the pub at 9, you know. And so I thought, well, I really love these guys. These are really good mates of mine, and we have really good chats. But I don't want to go on benders anymore. I don't want to drink. I don't want to do drugs. And what I started to do is I said, look, hey, do you and me want to catch up for dinner? 6 o'clock, I've got a table booked and such and such. And we go out to really nice restaurants, have really good meals. You know, they'd maybe have a glass of wine or something, but I did it on my terms. And you know what? Those relationships that I wanted to maintain and I felt worthy of having those connections, those mates, they actually got better because we were having deeper conversations. How's the missus? How's the kids? We got talking rather than just slapping each other's backs and talking bullshit and cracking jokes all night. It was more about having meaningful conversations. What are your challenges? What are you struggling with? And so firstly, those mateships got better because we did it on a different level and we did it in a better way. And then with work, that was again challenging again because the whole industry was built on getting out of it. And every social event and every marketing experience was built around, you know, lots of drinking and drugs. And so I had to really think about, get creative. What can I do with these people that will add value to their lives, but deepen their connection with me? Because it still was all about relationships. So I'd take them away on surfing retreats. You know, I'd take them away, you know, up the coast for yoga. And sometimes I'd take them and their wives out to the opera or to a play or to concerts. You know, we went to rock concerts. Pick them up in a limousine, take them to a concert, drop them home with their partners at 11 o'clock at night and get them into bed for a really nice, enjoyable night out. And so bringing more culture, more finesse, more deeper discussions, you know, having a nice dinner with them and their wives and my partner and wife, and, you know, having a much more intimate, deeper, meaningful experience and adding more value to their life. So again, it's about always looking at how do I refine and elevate in every area of my life. And then what that does is it allows other people to be inspired. and look at other options to be inspired by your actions.
Yeah, and really lead by example. I think that's also what you did. And some of the things I heard you say that really stood out to me is taking action. You took the action, you arranged more sober activities, you managed the social situations, and that gave you a lot better connection. One other little tip that stood out to me is like taking partners, right? When you take partners, that's all automatic accountability, that's automatic boundaries, that's helping you. Very rarely do we get as hammered with our partners as we do if we're just with the guys, right? So definitely taking them, making it more of a couple's date rather than the guys just going out and getting hammered, and changing the context of the situation. Some of the content still stays the same. There's still alcohol in the environment. There's still some stuff there, but the context changes, and you're going more to, like you say, a gig, or you're going to out for dinner. You're not going bonkers, and I think that's really important to slowly transition your social situation and your social environment and your own environment as well, because you don't want to lose that community, right? No one does. No one wants to lose that sense of community and just sit at home all day, every Friday, just being like, I can't go out and drink or use drugs, I'm just going to stay at home. That fucking sucks. So you want to transition it gradually like you did, and the people will come with you, right? If they're your true friends, you'll have things in common with them, like bands, whatever it may be, and they'll come with you for the journey.
And another thing to add to that is, a big part of my life back then, which was what the drugs and the drinking sort of centered around, was music, and that was bands and DJs. I was really into EDM, and I was really into the whole rave culture, and I was really into live bands as well, a lot of rock and stuff like that. And you know, my first thought is, how am I going to do this? That was really important to me, and I really learned how to get even more elevated, interestingly, through a sort of spiritual experience by going to those places and not taking drugs. And so I went to Burning Man for 7 days. I didn't drink or do drugs, and I loved it. It was like so powerful and such a deep spiritual experience for me to really immerse myself and have a more heightened experience, because I was actually more coherent, more conscious, more connected. I would take my son and friends, and we'd go see live bands in Sydney. And for me, it's still a big part of my life. And this is a funny story. Some of the listeners might find this a bit weird, or maybe entertaining or interesting. I was one morning, it was a rainy Sunday morning, and I used to go to yoga really early. This yoga school that I went to, they practice what's called, excuse me, they practiced Mysore yoga, Mysore Ashtanga yoga, which means you can start at any time. You don't have to be led by a teacher. As long as you know the sequence, you can turn up to the studio and start your practice when you want to start. And that would start at like, sometimes 3, 4 in the morning. The studio would be open. And I remember waking up quite early, as I used to as a meditator. And it was a rainy Sunday morning, so I got my yoga gear on. I thought, well, I'm not going to sleep in. I want to go to yoga. So I'm driving to yoga, and the yoga studio was near King's Cross, which was like a really big, at the time, big nightclub sort of location in Sydney. All the big nightclubs were in the Cross. And I was driving to yoga, and it was like 5 in the morning. And it was a very grey morning, was just starting to break. It was rainy and cold and miserable. And I thought, on my way to yoga, I'll just drive down the main drag of the Cross to see what's going on. And I drove past what was called at the time the Fishbowl, which is one of the big clubs in the Cross. And all I could hear was this oons, 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 oons. And it was like people milling out the front, and it was just like, sounded like brilliant dance music. And so I'm in my yoga gear, lucky I had some trainers on. I get out of the car, park the car. I went into the nightclub, which was sort of still rocking like crazy. And it was the best DJ set I've ever heard. And I danced for 2 hours straight. And I got home, and I just walked in the front door. My wife and kids, I said, I've just been in a nightclub for 2 hours. They looked at me like I was completely off my head, but it was such a good experience to just really wing it and go, you know what? Like, I was going to go to yoga, but I had just as a spiritual experience, and I got a lot of exercise by listening to some amazing music and dancing on my own for 2 hours.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And yeah, I think when there's such a stark contrast between being in that environment when you're doing those drugs and you're there and you're in one mindset, versus being in your yoga gear, just having so much fun and having all that pleasure and excitement and enjoyment and feeling the music, and also being present as well. I think one thing that stands out for me is a sense of presence when we're just disconnected with drink and drugs and we're just on a different planet. versus being present in the moment, being there, feeling the music, being in that environment, I think is so powerful. And you can have so many amazing transcendent or high level of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, experiences. And that's one thing that's really standing out to me that I'm really hearing is you can almost go much higher without drinking drugs to levels of pleasure, experience, fulfillment, love, connection, all of those things. You can get so much higher without the drinking drugs. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, of course, I had, no question about it. Some of those crazy days back then in the raves were pretty, no question about it, they were pretty heightened experiences. But there's something really long lasting about the memory of the ones where I was very clear. Like Burning Man, I remember every DJ set. I remember every moment, the sunrises and the night sky and the bright lights and riding your bike through the desert trying to find Robot Heart. All of that stays with you very clearly when you're in such a conscious, clear, coherent state. And it's this the experience itself with the music is very heightened and very pure, and a beautiful. For me, it's always been a very spiritual experience listening to music. And I found when I deepened my spiritual practice, my meditation, that didn't go away. In fact, it stayed with me still to this day, where music moves me, and I feel this incredible. We talk about this in more advanced spiritual discussions, but in every moment of every day, love making is happening, and it's not two bodies pressing up against each other. It's the twinkling of the lights. It's the sound of rain on a tin roof. It's the smell of freshly cut grass. It's the sound of dance music. It's the sound of the sea rumbling. Everything is the experience of you intertwining and interacting with nature, and that is love in making. We're in love, and we're in this beautiful dance. We call it lila in Sanskrit, which is the dance of the divine.
Yeah, that's really amazing. That's really amazing. And I think it's important to recognize, like, I feel like with addiction, you do get a big high, but then you get lots of negative consequences after. Like you say, your endorphins are depleted, you're depressed for days, like you don't have the endorphins there. Whereas I feel like when you're in the other area of transcendence, have a sense of, you get maybe perhaps less dopamine habits in the moment, but then it goes down a lot better and it stays with you and the memories stay with you and you feel it for days after. And you, like, I'm sure after Burning Man, even for like a month after, it was just kind of there, all that happiness and joy and just wow, the memories. And even to this day, when you explain it, right, that joy stays with you.
Yeah, I want also I think it's important we clarify, life still presents challenges. Even as a meditator, it's not like you're just completely on a high all the time. And I want people to understand the reality of this is that you still have difficult times and you still have to grapple with things, and things still won't go your way and things won't meet your expectations. And what we want to do is be able to dig deep and have that resilience and know that everything that we're going through, there's nothing we can't handle, and we can move through that. And we want to get gumption. Gumption's a word we don't hear anymore. And that's because we've become very soft in our society. And that's because we're constantly seeking pleasure and we're constantly finding the easiest route. We're not willing to do things that are difficult. We're not willing to fight for things. We're not willing to have gumption, which is that strength of character to get through those difficult times without having to tip ourselves into an unconscious state or some default back into checking out. And, I still have challenges. I still have things that are at times difficult. So what meditation gives me, it gives me that ability to pause and reflect and look at the situation with greater capacity to move into it and greater gumption to face that head on, and know that on the other side of that, something bigger and brighter and better is there. And that's what evolution is. And that every experience that we're having, as difficult as it might be, it's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to evolve. And that's why we're having that experience, and to not run from that, not to check out from that, but to actually lean into it. And that's where we'll actually find ourselves becoming just a better human overall.
Yeah. And are there any particular examples of any challenges you've had over the past kind of like 16 years or however many years it's been, of your own experience of any times that have been difficult that you haven't turned to drink or drugs and you've managed to get through it?
Oh, every day. You know, I've had some big ones. Obviously, having children, you know, there's always things that you grapple with. You want their world to be so beautiful and so, you know, perfect, but of course that's not possible. And so when your child is having difficult times, that's always hard. Or when your child's rebelling against your boundary lines, that's always hard. You know, relationship challenges, it's impossible to have a relationship with another person when you're living under one roof, where you don't have different viewpoints and different ways of doing things, or do things that might upset someone. And, you know, when you upset someone, that's just as bad as someone else upsetting you. Both of those can lead to a sense of discomfort. Business challenges, I've had immense business challenges along the way. I chuckle, but it's not funny. It is funny now, but it was very, very difficult for a long time. When I left finance and went out on my own, I had some really difficult times. We had to sell our house, and I'm blessed to have such a supportive family. Some people, their relationships might have been able to get through that. You know, we lost a lot of money and things have been difficult. So yeah, you know, it's important for people. I don't want to sugarcoat this and say, hey, start meditating, give up drugs and drinking, and your life's going to be perfect. That's not what it is. And what we've got to learn is that life will never meet our expectation at all times. We'll consistently be disappointed or let down by unmet circumstances.
Yeah, and it also takes practice as well. It's not like you meditated once 20 years ago and now you're all good for the rest of your life. It's something you practice on like a regular basis, right? It's something that's still in your life and that you focus on. It's not something you just kind of chuck away. It becomes a lifestyle and part of your life. Yeah,
and it gives you greater capacity to get through those difficult times, because you've got that support of there's an inner stability there. We call it tatiksha. It's an unruffability. There's a part of us that is able to be tapped into and experience that there's a stable part of us, whilst there's an unstable part of us as well. Our unstable part of us is our mind and our emotions. It's unstable, constantly changing. But the stable part of us is presence or being, and that's the spirituality side of our existence. And, you know, we've got these 4 layers: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. For most of us, we haven't really connected to that spiritual part of us, and that's the stable part of us that helps us get through those difficult times.
Yeah, that's amazing. And as we come towards the end, did you have anything else you wanted to share with the audience? Any way they can find out more about you?
Yeah, I'd love to, you know, hear from them, hear where they're at, any struggles or challenges they have. If there's any way I can support them, they can reach out to me on Instagram, Tom Cronin, one word. I read all my messages and I respond to all my messages. So I'd love to hear from them. And they can go to my website, tomcronin.com. We've got some programs that might be able to help them. But also, I guess the main thing is just to know that if there's some degree of pain, suffering, discomfort, discord in life, it's there for a reason, and it's a very good reason. It's like a loving mother that disciplines a child, you know, and that discipline, although it's painful and uncomfortable, it's actually there for a reason, because they love you and they want to guide you and they want to support you in having better decisions in life and finding a better path in life. And that's what the divine intelligence is for me. That's what I see it as. It's like, it's the way of the universe to, from its loving point of care and tenderness, look after you and try to help you make better decisions. So tune into the discomfort, not the pleasure. Tune into the discomfort, any ramifications. And if you're not getting ramifications from pleasure seeking, like going on retreat or eating healthy food, or, you know, if the byproduct of you doing your actions is positive, then keep doing that. And if the byproduct of your actions is negative, then maybe question whether that's something you should keep doing.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And yeah, thanks very much for coming on the show. We're going to put all the links and stuff down in the description so you can find out more about Tom. And I really recommend checking out his website and checking out his courses. And of course, if you want to go deeper into transcendental meditation, that's an amazing resource and place to go. So thanks everyone for listening today, and thanks Tom for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here today.